Welcome to Inside Lake Forest. I'm Eileen Looby, your host, and today I have the privilege of riding along with Jim Toohey here and his horse and carriage and enjoying a historical tour with our local historian, Art Miller. We'll be stepping inside and taking a tour around Lake Forest. Art, it's a pleasure having you here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're on this wonderful horse and carriage entering Lake Forest here on Deer Path. Tell me when Lake Forest was founded and a brief history here about our beautiful city hall.
Okay, Lake Forest was founded in 1857. The plan for the town was registered in that year in Waukegan.
Okay.
It was all east of the tracks, and we're now on the part of the town that's west of the tracks. On our left over here is City Hall, and that was built in 1899. City Hall is by Frost and Granger Architects, and it was built right at the time that the North Shoreline went through, and they had gone from Waukegan south to Lake Forest, and they'd come up from Evanston to Highland Park, and they came to Lake Forest, and they said, "Oh, we're ready to go through Lake Forest." And the city said, "Go through with what?" And they said, "What do you mean? We have to complete the line." And they said, "That will be $10,000. And you'd be surprised to know that the City Hall building cost exactly $10,000. What a coincidence. So it originally housed the fire department. The library was upstairs where the city council chambers are now, and the offices were downstairs. The fire department moved out though in a few years because the way they dried the hoses was to put them over the library tables, so the librarian would come in the morning, and the wet hoses were all over her books. So I think they had a little sparks flying over that, and they decided it would be more efficient to have the fire department somewhere else.
Okay.
Now we're going along Western Avenue, and it was called Western Avenue because it's just west of the town, and all the businesses were put on this street.
Okay.
They had agreed not to have any businesses in East Lake Forest. By 1895 and 6, the Enwencia Club was founded.
Okay.
And people were going to west of Lake Forest along Green Bay Road. So they decided that the downtown area had to be spruced up. It was a sandwich between estates on the east side and estates west of it, and it needed to be jazzed up. So it was redeveloped from 1912 to 1917, as we see here with the buildings that are in the square.
Art, tell me a little bit more about the architecture here and why Market Square is so special to our community.
Well, Market Square is special because it was the first town center planned around motor vehicles, both automobiles and trucks. The alleys were big enough for the old-time trucks in 1915, 16, 17. And it was also the first planned town center built around the idea that you would do this commercially, not with a city hall or a library as your lead building, but actually have the whole thing make sense commercially. Now we're at the west end of the square right now, and they went through 3 plans, and this plan was the one that pushed the square back to create 300% more Western Avenue front footage so that people getting off the train could see all the store windows. Merchants would pay more rent. So that drove the plan.
So in terms of some of the stores, Art, I know we've had several multi-generational stores here who maybe moved around in town, but could you highlight a few of the special ones for us?
Well, the one that's been here since the beginning in 1916 is Griffith, Grant & Lackey Realtors. Griffith was the developer, the local developer for the project, and the manager for the first couple of generations, the firm was. And it was in their basement that actually all the papers and plans for the square were found in 1998, and that's how we learned a lot about what we know today about the square. Other older businesses include Heelanders, which was started out as a radio store around World War II and morphed into the stationer's store that it is today. And the sports shop, the Lake Forest Sports Shop, which is again also multi-generational, was a women's clothing and custom clothing boutique. And upstairs there was a seamstress shop above the store, and next door where the Berghorns were living. And Mrs. Berghorn was sewing one day, and they saw her sewing, And they said, could you help us? We're kind of pressed here. So she worked for him for about 40 years.
Wow.
Doing alterations and things like that.
So including the Lake Forest shop, which is obviously they've renamed with the moving forward with the times. What other businesses would you like to touch on?
Particularly besides Heelanders, which you mentioned, and Griffith, Grant and Lackey, which you mentioned, the Kittles store, which is still very active as bikes and bike repair and used bikes and things related to that, is a many generation store. The Kittle family came to town. They were gardeners originally, worked on the big estates, and gradually went into the business. In like a second generation, went into the business that's here. It's now owned by another multi-generational family, but it's still doing the same thing it's done for generations. The store on the corner here where the Bootery is was originally owned by a fellow from Waukegan, Jack Benny's father, and the mid-20th century comedian, and Benny used to come and visit here and stay with his folks in the apartment up above. So there are lots of businesses that had a long history here. And
we've seen a lot of changes and obviously moving with the times.
Exactly. And so there's lots of new businesses that are frequented by people here in town. A lot of clothing businesses. The toy store has been here as long as I've been here, since the 70s, and it's still perfect. It's still competitive against the internet because, wonderfully enough, they will assemble the little toys for you, or the big toys, and it's cheaper in the long run than actually buying it over the net. So
fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit about the architecture here. And we've got 2 clock towers.
Sure. Okay. The 2 clock towers were a part of the original plan from 1912. When they decided to have a long park here to get more rent, they relocated the former Marshall Field store further west and added big macho features that you can see from the train station, those Tuscan columns that are pretty strong features visually. Marshall Fields was there from the 1930s until the 2000s, and it was really designed by Marshall Fields to come out here because originally, before Market Square, people did all their shopping downtown, and they noticed that some of the estate people weren't stopping by the store anymore. They were buying in Lake Forest, so they opened their first branch in Lake Forest in 1931, in that location. So it was a big store here, major anchor store for generations. So the clock towers, they were originally part of the plan from 1912, but they were shorter, and they were both alike. And what's interesting is that when they redid the plan in the 3rd version, done in 1915, they got taller, and the north tower was changed. The south tower looks like a German romantic road or Alsatian town tower with its curving, wavy roof. But the other tower looks much more almost modern, like this Stockholm, Sweden town hall of 1910, or Christopher Wren's towers in London in the early 18th century, that sort of thing. So it took on a little bit different character in that plan, but they're really very tall now, and they're very much focal points for seeing the square.
Absolutely.
So horses are really a big part of the history of Lake Forest and the Market Square area. Horses and liveries were how everybody got to their houses in Lake Forest. If you arrived and you didn't know where you were going, you saw the livery driver, initially Samuel Dent, who was an escaped slave and Union soldier. He died in 1890, and then Julian Matthews took over, another African-American, former slave era, and they would take you to your place that you were going in East Lake Forest. Places didn't have street addresses. You just had to know the name of the family or the house, and they would take you there. Otherwise, you couldn't find it on your own. You'd be lost. So right in this area was located a big livery stable across the street from the station, so that people could rent rigs or could get a ride. And when they bought this land for the square in 1912, one of the first things they moved was that livery stable with its certain je ne sais quoi of horses, little insects and things like that, that the Enwencia people who'd come in the 1890s didn't find particularly atmospheric. So that was one of the first things to be moved. They relocated to the corner of Illinois and Washington here in town. The horses attraction in town was starting in 1900, the year that the new station opened, and going until 1970 was the Lake Forest Horse Show in late June. And by the teens, like 15,000 people were coming to these shows, and they needed a big new station to handle all the crowds. So that was part of the demand for having a more attractive downtown area that people could enjoy and do their shopping in. So we've got a great view here from just opposite the train station, looking down toward what was Marshall Field for so many years, and the escutcheon over the store actually, over the building, actually is an 18th century Baroque element, but it has Howard Shaw, the architect's initials in it. The fountain here was designed by him and also has a plaque in his honor on it. It was done also in 1916. The sculpture was done by his daughter, Sylvia Shaw Judson, and that was installed much later, but it had been planned to be for her also all along. So the fountain has been here continuously since 1917. One of the oldest water features still functioning in town. The train station we see here was built in 1900, and there were 3 other stations earlier than that, but this one was built for the large Untitled crowds coming every summer. The community was growing, and then gradually more and more people were building estates here that went to the Untitled Club. So the station we see is by Frost and Granger. They were both sons-in-law of the president of the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. So he was definitely interested in the quality of the stations, and so he had his own son-in-laws do them.
So Art, as we cross over the tracks here into the original east side of Lake Forest,
right.
We're going to be heading towards now the library. When was that established here?
The library was built and completed in 1931, and it was by the architect Edwin Hill Clark. It's been a major local gathering place ever since. It was a prize winner when it was built, and it has a gracious lawn leading up to it. Now this was all part of the land that it's on, was all part of the first estate, the Quinlan Estate, and this was completed in 1859, and there were gardens where this is, but you can see the wonderful Art Deco style of the Excedra seat down in front, and the dome. It's very Jeffersonian dome up above, and it's been expanded but very sympathetically since. And
Art, does that have any connection with the Shedd Aquarium at all?
The family of Mrs. Kersey Coates Reed, she was, his wife was daughter of John Shedd, who was president of Marshall Field and Company, and her sister, Mrs. Charles Sweppy, made the funds available to build the library building in 1930.
So now we're here at Triangle Park. Tell me the significance of that, Art.
Sure. Triangle Park was actually the original place where the first building in town was.
Okay.
It was a hotel that opened in 1858, so that people, it's up at the other end of the property on the highest part, because we're really in a ravine right now. The deer path that we're going along was a deer path. It was the first road you could use going east toward the lake. And so the hotel was looking over that path and the ravine. It was a simple Greek Revival style building.
So Art, tell me a little bit about these first homes that were in Lake Forest.
So this house that's on our right, that's a big gray house with big porches, that was originally the Presbyterian Church manse, and later was given to Dr. McClure, who was the pastor for a long time. And he was instrumental in turning this into a park, also in creating the library at City Hall. Very strong influence in the community. It's typical of the big houses that were built in the 1880s and 1890s. That house was completed in 1887, and the architects were Cobb and Frost, Henry Ives Cobb and Charles S. Frost.
So Art, tell me about the original school that was here.
Well, this was kind of the heart of the community, and by 1860 already, there was a school just to our right, the original school building. The original school mistress was Roxana Beecher, a niece of Harriet Beecher Stowe. And Lake Forest was actually an integrated community from the start. And that's how District 67 got started, as a branch of the city of Lake Forest.
Okay.
And she taught probably integrated classes, but before the Emancipation Proclamation, they didn't really go to a lot of trouble to write these things down. But by 1864, after that proclamation had been published and African Americans were free, they did start logging the fact that they had night schools for them at that building.
Okay.
So the building has now been relocated to Westminster Place, Westminster Avenue, just to the north, but this was the original location right here near the old hotel. We're going by over here, property that was there were a pair of houses that were built 1860, 1861, right at the beginning of Lake Forest. And one was an irregular Andrew Jackson Downing style villa, and the other was regular. We're looking at the irregular one would be more of a kind of a fanciful person was the owner, and if you look at this house, you can see it definitely has fancy in its character. It's got a tower that's gilded, it's got irregular massing, and it's very individual personality to it.
Absolutely.
Its matching pair we'll see later on as we drive along.
Okay, great.
So this is, on my right is the house that's the other half of that pair of houses. This is also an Andrew Jackson Downing mid-19th century Italian villa, but this is the regular one. It's symmetrical. It's based on the casinos at the Villa Lante in Italy, and it's very much in its original character as we see it today, but built in 1860. And the wood on the side is from the lumber baron who owned the place from his lumber field up in Canada in Wisconsin on Green Bay, and the wood was brought down especially for the house. This little crescent of buildings were designed by a post-Chicago fire architect, and then there was a landscape done. The landscape with the open lawn around these three yellow brick buildings was done by a man named William Gordon, and he was an English-trained landscape gardener.
Okay.
And he designed this area just as he is in his old age, and he died very shortly after that at about 80.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the chapel art.
Okay, the chapel and the two Greystone buildings, which kind of echo the style of the University of Chicago that went up. They went up in 1900, same time as the train station and with the same architects. And they were built to reflect a smaller college scale.
I've had the pleasure today to be touring here with Art Miller, our local historian, and Jim Toohey, who's been driving our horse and carriage. I hope you've enjoyed our segment of our historic tour of Lake Forest today.